The American diner didn't disappear overnight. It was there for nearly 100 years. A real place on a real corner, open at 2 in the morning when nothing else was. Run by people who knew your name and started pouring your coffee before you sat down. Then one day, you drove past, and the windows were papered over. A "for lease" sign in the door. Most of us moved on without much thought. But the diner itself, one of the most recognizable institutions in American daily life, quietly ceased to be a part of it. Here's how it worked, why it mattered, and how it came to an end. In many towns, large and small, well into the second half of the 20th century, eating out didn't mean making a reservation or choosing from a chain. It meant pulling into a parking lot you recognized, pushing open a glass door with a bell above it, and sitting wherever you liked. Counter or booth, your choice. The menu was laminated and long. It covered everything. Eggs any way you wanted them, a burger and fries, pie by the slice rotating in a glass case near the register, coffee that came immediately and kept coming. The prices were written in marker on a board or printed in type so small it barely mattered because you already knew what you were going to order. The person behind the counter knew the regulars. She knew who took their eggs over easy, who wanted toast instead of a roll, who came in every Tuesday after the early shift and needed a few minutes before they were ready to talk. In smaller towns, the diner was where you went after the game, after the funeral, after the job interview. It wasn't neutral ground, it was familiar ground. It belonged to whoever walked through the door. The diner had its own geography. In New Jersey, they were everywhere. Chrome and neon, enormous menus, open all night. In the South and Midwest, they were simpler, plainer, but the same idea. A short order cook behind a window, a woman with a pot of coffee making her rounds, a place where a meal cost what a meal should cost, and nobody asked you to leave. The diner didn't disappear because it stopped doing its job. It disappeared because the economics of doing that job became nearly impossible to sustain, and the forces working against it had been building for decades. The problem started with real estate. Diners were almost always owner-operated, usually by a family, often the same family for 2 or 3 generations. They sat on corners, on main streets, on the edge of commercial strips. For years, that land was worth just enough to make the math work. Then the cities grew, the suburbs expanded, and the land underneath those diners became valuable in ways that had nothing to do with breakfast. A landlord who'd been content to collect modest rent from a diner for 30 years suddenly had developers calling. The family running the diner couldn't come close to matching what a pharmacy chain or a fast food franchise could pay. Leases didn't get renewed, buildings got sold. Diners that had operated since the 1940s closed not because they were struggling, but because the ground they stood on was worth more than they were. At the same time, the workforce changed. Diners ran on labor. A short-order cook who worked the grill for 20 years, a waitress who memorized the specials and never wrote down an order. That kind of staff didn't come cheap anymore, and it didn't come easily. Wages rose. Turnover increased. Finding someone willing to work a double on a Sunday for what the margin allowed became harder every year. And then there was the competition. To understand the fall, you have to understand what the diner had been up against and for how long. The diner's roots go back to the 1870s and 1880s, when a man named Walter Scott in Providence, Rhode Island, began selling food out of a horse-drawn wagon to factory workers who needed a cheap meal after their shift. The idea spread. By the early 20th century, prefabricated diners were being manufactured in factories and shipped by rail to towns across the country. You could order one like furniture. It would arrive on a flatbed, get bolted to a foundation, and be open for business within weeks. They were built for efficiency and accessibility, low overhead, fast service, affordable food. In the post-war years, when returning veterans were buying houses in the suburbs and the middle class was expanding and the roads were filling with cars, the diner was perfectly positioned. It was everywhere you needed it to be. Then came McDonald's, then Burger King. Then, as the decades turned, Applebee's, TGI Fridays, Denny's. Chains that could buy ingredients in bulk, pay less per unit, market nationally, and open locations faster than any family operation could respond to. The chains didn't necessarily make better food, but they made consistent food at a price point that undercut the diner's core proposition. By the 1990s, a new wave arrived: fast casual dining, Chipotle, Panera, Shake Shack. Restaurants that offered something the chains had never quite managed: the feeling of quality, of care, of food made with actual ingredients, at a speed the diner had always been known for. Suddenly, the diner's last advantage had competition that understood what it was competing against. The customer who might have eaten at a diner 3 times a week in 1975 now had 15 other options within the same radius. Many of those options were cleaner, quieter, more photogenic. They had Wi-Fi. The diner had coffee and a view of the parking lot. If there was a single decade when the diner's fate became certain, it was the 1990s. That was when the regional chains fully consolidated their hold on the American roadside. It was when commercial real estate in most American metros entered a sustained period of appreciation that made corner properties prohibitively expensive for independent operators. It was when the fast casual concept proved itself financially and began spreading aggressively. And it was when the demographics shifted in ways the diner struggled to answer. A generation raised on global cuisine, dietary trends, and restaurant media had different expectations. They wanted avocado toast and small plates and a cocktail menu and exposed brick and an Instagram that looked like something. The diner offered a turkey club and a counter stool and a waitress who called everyone hun. For many younger eaters, that wasn't charm, it was indifference. Some diners adapted. They updated their menus, added vegetarian options, put Wi-Fi passwords on the chalkboard by the door. A few became ironic destinations, beloved precisely because they were unchanged. But most couldn't pivot fast enough, and most didn't have the capital to try. When COVID arrived in 2020, it found a category of businesses that had already been weakened by 40 years of structural pressure. Diners closed by the hundreds during the shutdowns. Many never reopened. The ones that survived often did so on savings the owners had accumulated over decades and didn't expect to spend all at once. In New Jersey, which had more diners per capita than any state in the country, the losses were severe. Institutions that had survived the Depression, multiple recessions, and the entire rise and fall of the American mall did not survive a year and a half of restricted capacity and a customer base that had learned during the lockdown that it could order food on a phone and never talk to anyone at all. What this meant in daily life was a gradual shift in what eating out felt like. The first time you drove down a main street and realized the diner on the corner was a smoothie franchise now. The first time you looked for somewhere to eat after midnight and found nothing open. The first time you tried to explain to someone younger what it had meant to just walk in, sit down, and know that someone would take care of you, and realized there was no easy equivalent to point to. Most people adapted. The new options were fine. The food was often better by certain measures. Life moved on. What was lost was harder to name. At their peak, diners employed hundreds of thousands of Americans in jobs that were steady, skilled, and deeply local. Short-order cooks who had mastered a grill the way other people mastered instruments. Waitresses who worked the same section for 15 years and knew things about the neighborhood that no one else knew. Owners who lived above the restaurant or around the corner, who came in at 5 in the morning and left at 9 at night and considered the regulars something closer to community than customers. That texture of daily life was ordinary at the time. It only became visible in retrospect, once the thing it was attached to was already gone. The American diner didn't disappear because it stopped being good at what it did. It disappeared because the land it sat on became too valuable, the labor it depended on became too expensive, and the competition it faced became too sophisticated. It was a long, slow unwinding that unfolded over decades, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, until the thing that had been there your whole life simply wasn't anymore. Whether it's gone for good is a different question. A new generation of owners is opening diners in some cities, deliberately, with an understanding of what made them worth preserving. They're not nostalgia projects. They're betting that the original idea, honest food, real service, a place that belongs to whoever walks through the door, still has a market. They might be right. If this brought back a memory, a corner booth, a particular cup of coffee, a waitress whose name you still remember, go ahead and like the video. It helps more people find this channel. Subscribe to keep exploring the everyday details of American life that most history skips over. And leave a comment. Tell us which diner you're thinking about right now. Tell us if it's still there, because that's the part that can't be researched. That's the part only you know.